When Joe Kittenger came to Alamogordo and Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, he got the first view of his new military posting as he crossed the Sacramento Mountains through Cloudcroft. At 8,300 feet in altitude, he saw the Tularosa Basin spread out before him. It wouldn't be long before Kittinger's assignment took him far, far higher. As America entered the space race, a prominent question was, would humans be able to survive in Earth's upper atmosphere and beyond to space? Training in simulators was a start.
Inside one of the buildings at Holloman is the high altitude chamber, or to be precise, the environmental simulator. The simulator can and does create the exact conditions encountered by man at extreme altitudes. By placing man within the chamber and simulating the desired altitude, it is possible to subject him to the pressure, temperature, and even humidity experienced in the upper atmosphere. Within such a chamber, it is possible for the Air Force to observe and record the responses of man and his equipment in the prelude to actual high-altitude flight. However, it is not possible to understand all facets of high-altitude flight through ground testing such as this. There comes a time when man and his instruments must go aloft and see for himself.
The only way to know for real was to put someone into that environment. Potential pilots underwent a battery of strenuous tests, including being isolated for claustrophobia.
Man has flown experimental aircraft at altitudes above 100,000 feet, yet only long enough to give the pilot a fleeting moment at that height on any one flight. For careful, prolonged observation, balloon travel is more practical.
The first of the 3 man-high missions took place on June 2, 1957. The assignment for that flight fell to Air Force and test pilot Joe Kittinger. He had been fitted into a tight, partial pressure suit. He entered the capsule at 1 a.m. for the 6:23 a.m. ascent.
A pressurized gondola or capsule capable of carrying a human observer to the outer limits of the Earth's atmosphere is to be used. On the inside, the capsule is cramped and rather uncomfortable, but does have windows for the pilot to observe the view. For no mechanical gadget yet invented can tell exactly how it feels to a living human to hover on the very threshold of space. There are biological questions to examine, such as the effect, if any, of cosmic rays on the human body. And there are psychological questions to be answered. How will the human mind and spirit react to the sensation of drifting in cramped quarters, completely alone, 20 miles above the Earth?
The capsule rose at 400 feet a minute, increasing an additional 100 feet per minute at 45,000 feet, where the tropopause begins. Temperatures dropped precipitously, and a 100-mile-an-hour wind there flung him nearly horizontal. His ascent leveled out at 96,000 feet in altitude.
Here, at the end of its flight, the capsule with its human cargo is met by crews that have followed every minute of its flight. The capsule is set upright, opened, and the pilot emerges unscathed and unharmed.
2 more missions in the enclosed capsule would follow, one by Dr. David Simons. Sealed into the 8-foot-tall by 3-feet diameter capsule, crammed with equipment, and floating under the balloon in near space, Simons was studying how humans isolated in space react. He was the first human to spend a night in space.
America, back from the highest altitude ever reached by man, 19 miles above the Earth, comes a plastic balloon with a silver-coated gondola. For 24 hours, this tiny, pressurized cell was the laboratory of Major David Simons, a U.S. Air Force doctor. He was testing the reaction of the human body in the unknown regions of space.
The final man-high flight carried Clifton Demi McClure. His mission was aborted after his body temperature soared abnormally high. He survived unscathed. In 1959 and 1960, Kittinger made 3 more ascents, but for those, he left the relative safety of the gondola to freefall and plummet toward Earth. Known as Project Excelsior, he was testing a multi-stage parachute that pilots would use if they had to eject from a high-flying jet. Parachutes of the era tended to put the wearer into a high-rotation spin, causing the pilot to pass out. Excelsior 1 launched on November 16, 1959. Kittinger jumped at 76,400 feet in altitude. When the first parachute opened early, He began spinning twice every second and passed out. When his second parachute opened at 10,000 feet, he regained consciousness and safely landed. Excelsior 2 lifted off less than a month later, on December 11th. He left the gondola at 74,700 feet and, controlling the free fall, opened his main parachute at 55,000 feet. 8 months would pass before Excelsior 3, which ascended on August 16, 1960.
I'm Joe Kittenger. I spent 29 years in the United States Air Force. Half my career was spent in research and development, working as a test pilot. The other half was a fighter pilot. The takeoff was in the morning at about 6 o'clock. The climb time from takeoff to 102,000 feet was about an hour and a half. And 40,000 feet, which is where my pressure suit inflates. And I suddenly discovered that a pressure suit glove, my right hand, was not working. I knew that if I told the people on the ground that it wasn't working, that they'd make me abort the flight. So I opted not to tell the people on the ground that I had this problem. I could not use my right hand during the flight. Everything I had to use my left hand. It swelled up about twice its normal size. Well, the sign on the bottom of the gondola was, "This is the highest step in space." Think about being at 102,000 feet. It was a very interesting experience for me to sit there and look at the horizon, and I could see over 400 miles from that altitude. My guy on the ground said, "Okay, we're over the position, you're clear to jump." And I jumped. I fell for, it seemed like I wasn't moving at all. There was no crest, no velocity. There's nothing you can see. So I rolled over my back, I looked up, and I saw the balloon flying into space. I said, "My gosh, that's amazing." And then suddenly I realized that the balloon was sitting still and I was going down at a fantastic rate. And then the small drogue chute came out and I free fell, stabilized from that altitude all the way down to 14,000 feet with my main parachute open. And then it was just a question of getting down to the ground. When I landed, my team was right there immediately. We were just ecstatic because we had accomplished what we set out to do. We had shown that man could go into space and work properly. We showed that we could protect him in a space environment. We showed that we could get a man down from high altitude. So there were a lot of firsts on the program.
Kittinger would eventually return to his Air Force roots as a pilot to fly combat in Vietnam. On May 11, 1972, he was shot down in Vietnam and was a prisoner of war for a time. He had been just 17 days away from returning to the United States when his F-4 Phantom took a hit. What kept him going, he says, was working out in his mind how he could make a solo balloon flight across the Atlantic Ocean. In 1984, he did just that, leaving the United States in September and landing days later in Italy.